He's from here, but he's been living and traveling extensively in the United States. And he's a writer, a songwriter, and he's going to share with us two of his own compositions in the social protest genre. Take it away, Lloyd Hart.
This is absolutely a new song no one has ever heard. All right, so I've got to look at the lyrics while I'm playing it, so it's not going to be a great video shot, but I'll try and like.
Want me to hold it up for you or something?
No, don't hold it up. That's like slavery. That's like, you know, that's like 14th century symphony music. Okay. This is like, I wrote this almost immediately after Tom Petty died. And I was deeply moved by that man. You know, when he died, that just killed me. So I wrote this, you know, in kind of his genre. Run through the streets with glee, but that don't mean nothing to me. You might get on TV, say look, you can't catch me, but that don't mean nothing to me. No. You might talk, take us to war, make us all poor, but that don't mean nothing to me. I might keep my eyes on you as you walk from side to side, but that don't mean nothing to me. 'Cause you're a criminal. Don't mean nothing to me. You might get on TV, say look, you can't catch me, but that don't mean nothing to me. You might take us to war, make us all poor, but that don't mean nothing to me.
Good evening. Over the past 2 weeks, we've had some very inspirational discussions. The first was led by our comrade from the Nouveau Parti Anticapitaliste, the NPA, in France, who spoke about the current struggles there and the fight back against the Macron government. Last week, leading member of Socialist Action, Yasin Kaya, spoke about the permanent revolution, Stalinism, and the transitional program. And tonight, I have the pleasure to talk to you about how we can make socialism become a reality in the Canadian state and beyond. So let's just cut to the chase. Capitalism, with all its irrationality, chaos, and inequality that comes along with it, is bad. There is only one alternative, a socialist world. Last week I saw a post on Facebook that pretty much sums up this situation, and it read, "If you are not a radical in a world where millions of people are starving to death, well, 8 people have more wealth than the bottom 50% combined, then what the fuck is wrong with you?" So tonight, I will talk about the prospects for a socialist transformation of the Canadian state and the strategy that Socialist Action believes is necessary to advance it. So, what do we mean by socialism? So by socialism, we refer to 2 things. One, the idea and the political program associated with the class struggle of workers and allies in the quest for an egalitarian and democratic world. And 2, the movement in each country organized to achieve that. And I'll just repeat that. It's the ideas and the political program associated with the class struggle in the quest for an egalitarian world, and it's the movement in each country organized to achieve it. But before we go too much further, it would help to have an overview of what we mean by socialism. In essence, socialism is the program that says that people should be in control of their own destinies, their lives, including the institutions in which they work, and the communities in which we live, and so on. This is traditional socialism. It means the democratization of all aspects of life, in which the political, economic, and social aspects of life. It is a system in which billions of workers will be the masters. It is a system in which the means of production, distribution, and exchange, transportation, communication, all of these things are under public control, democratic public control. And democracy is an intrinsic, fundamental, and essential part of socialism. Socialists believe that we need to break with the capitalist marketplace. Socialists believe that all capitalist private property, not personal property, but private property relations, must be abolished. In short, socialists believe that democracy and capitalism are fundamentally incompatible. In the world today, economic activity is significantly determined by the investment decisions of private capitalists. Big capitalists can essentially veto or block government policies that they think are against their interests. So long as the fundamental structures of the economy remain unchanged, government action will always disproportionately benefit capitalist interests at the expense of everyone else. Economic power is reflected in political power, and under capitalism, the owners of capital will always have the capacity to undermine popular democracy. So, why must workers lead the struggle? Well, we see workers as central agents of social change. Now, this isn't a case of idealizing workers. It's based on our structural position in the economy. Labor and nature are the source of all wealth. We, as laborers, have the ability to disrupt production, distribution, and exchange. We have a material interest in banding together and articulating our collective demands. This makes workers the key agents of change under capitalism. Now, this view is often caricatured by liberals and other progressive types that say a focus on the working class ignores struggles for racial justice, immigrants' rights, struggles against homophobia, for reproductive freedom, environmental protection, and so on. But nothing could be further from the truth. This is primarily because the working class is in its majority female and disproportionately racialized and immigrant. And this is not to discourage the courageous struggles waged on these issues. I mean, they have enormous value, but in terms of constituting a coordinated effort to overthrow capitalism, they just fall short. The working class has this power because the capitalist can make profits if the workers show up every day. But if they stop working, then the profits dry up pretty quickly. And if there's one thing that catches the boss's attention more than anything, it's when the money stops flowing. So this is the ability to bring down the entire system, both businesses and government, just by refusing to work. This gives the workers a kind of power that no other section of society has. Workers are therefore not only the social group that is systematically oppressed and exploited in modern society, they are also the group best positioned to enact real change. And we can extract concessions from the major centers of powers, the bankers and the business people who run the system. Workers are the vast majority of modern society. This is more so today than at any time in history. Today there are over 3 billion people active in the workplace. Of that, 1.3 billion people earn less than $5 a day. That's insane. That's crazy. They are among the poorest globally and the ones who every day suffer indignities, insecurity, and anxiety of what to do with their lives when they are under somebody else's control. Workers are the people that suffer the most under capitalism, but they are also the class that comes into contact with capitalists every day. Workers are the only class that can take on the power of capital to improve their lives, and in turn, the lives of everybody else. So today the socialist movement in Canada is not strong. It is, however, growing. Every day we see more and more people getting involved in the struggle for a socialist transformation of the world. So why is this? Because people see increasing inequality all around us. They see more homeless people and the growth of precarious and temporary work. They see numerous incidents related to mental health conditions, just like the one we saw on the Danforth a couple of weeks ago. They see the rise, not the fall, of racist attacks on people of color, and they see increasing, not decreasing, incidents of homophobia and a very serious and real rise in police violence. These are not isolated issues. They are all part of a pattern. Yet at the same time, the ideas of social ownership and democratic control are deeply embedded in the population. A large majority of people favor public health care, public education, public transit, public parks, public libraries. A large majority favor publicly regulated standards for goods and services, for clean water, for safe food, for medicine, high standards for the construction of buildings and roads and vehicles. All of these things are byproducts of the struggle for socialism. They are the fruits of generations of worker struggles. And they have been won inside a system that is utterly and fundamentally hostile to such gains. And it is precisely for this reason that things like Medicare, Ontario Hydro, postal services are under constant, fierce attack. After all, the capitalist system is designed to maximize profit, not to satisfy social needs. So anything that can be squeezed to yield a profit is going to be a target for privatization. The other reason for the attacks on social gains is the inherent instability and irrationality of the capitalist system. The boom-bust cycle creates the need to dump social programs and all of the costs associated with them simply in order to raise the rate of profit. Now, suffice it to say that while the socialist movement is weak, the attachment of masses of people to social gains is strong. I've just said this, but
It's okay.
in fact, attacks on our social gains.
It's a good argument, bears repeating.
Yes, that's right. So, in fact, attacks on our social gains have the effect of straining popular confidence in the system. This increases the potential of organized socialists to stimulate social justice struggles, to influence mass public opinion, and to prepare the basis for revolutionary socialist change. So, history teaches us three things above all. First, that nothing is permanent except change. Second, that big changes can happen very fast, sometimes quite suddenly. And third, either we prepare to make history, or we are doomed to be its victims. Now, this concluding session of Socialism in the Park is dedicated to the idea that we can make history by being organized and by avoiding the mistakes of the past. So, what is the nature of the present political period? Well, the business class is on the offensive. The working class, including white, blue, and pink-collar workers, small farmers, small businesses, self-employed professionals, along with the aged, the infirm, and the destitute, are all under severe and sustained attack by employers and their governments. Now, with the post-World War II social contract, the capitalist class was able to buy social peace in the 1940s and 50s and 60s in exchange for concessions to the working class and for the poor in the form of benefits. Now, the social benefits, my pages are sticking together. It's so humid. The social benefits were funded by a relatively high rate of taxation on businesses and the rich. But this arrangement suffered greatly by the end of the post-war economic boom in the 1970s. Capital demanded tax relief, and, of course, capitalist governments complied. But rather than suddenly stop social programs, which would stir up enormous public anger, governments resorted to the excuse of debt and deficits. The government saddled workers with debt. Debt and fiscal deficits became the rationale for cutbacks to social expenditures, in combination with user fees and higher taxes on the middle class and working people. To justify a wage freeze and speed up on the job, which capital demanded to raise the rate of profit, the bosses played the global competitiveness card. And to quell any continental or regional resistance to capitalist priorities, the big powers intervened by stealth or overt means to remove non-compliant governments that try to assert their autonomy. Limited but persistent interventions abroad have now grown into permanent wars of occupation and empire consolidation. So, you may ask, what is the response of the labor movement to this situation?
What is the response of the labor movement?
Thank you for asking.
I was just thinking that.
So the response of the labor leadership has been primarily to retreat. Pro-capitalist bureaucrats lead most of the unions. They wage battles against the bosses and reluctantly fight back, but only when pushed by the rank and file. With capitalism in a global crisis, the bosses push harder and the union brass make concessions. And the labor leaders do so for a variety of reasons. They lack confidence in their membership, they fear losing control of the situation where the ranks are set in motion, and they fear challenging the system itself. So the labor leadership tends to act as a brake on workers. And now this braking action becomes sort of a new norm, and that further undermines labor confidence. And as things get worse, with less room to maneuver on both sides of the bargaining table, the labor brass seek to tighten their control over the ranks by curtailing union democracy. So how is this done? So it's done by restricting debate and limiting votes on contracts, by manipulating union elections, and more importantly, by amalgamating local workplace bargaining units into giant regional union bodies which meet infrequently and are run according to bureaucratic rules and tend to be dominated by the privileged cliques. So, when the employer or government actions become too outrageous to ignore, labor leaders must resort to mobilization of the ranks. But they mobilize primarily to let off steam rather than to challenge or to replace those in control of the levers of power. However, shutting down a massive protest movement can sometimes be worse than not mobilizing one at all. For instance, the termination of the Ontario Days of Action in the mid-1990s so demoralized the labor movement that Mike Harris and the Tories were easily re-elected in 1999. Every sellout of workers has a ripple effect. We cannot let this happen again today. The fight against Doug Ford is critical, because if you think that things were bad during the Mike Harris years, you haven't seen anything yet, and that much I can guarantee you. So let's just take a moment to talk about the current Ontario government. The election of Doug Ford, like Mike Harris before him and Donald Trump in the United States presently, is the result of a long process of political, cultural, and social decay. Ford is the product of our failed capitalist democracy. It is a myth that we live in a genuine democracy, that the Doug Fords and Donald Trumps of the world are somehow deviations that can be fixed in the next election. And the more we believe that the next election will be we'll get rid of them and be able to move on, the more we will hurtle toward despotism and devastation. The problem is not Mr. Ford or Mr. Trump. It is the corrupt political system dominated by corporate power. But workers can take political control by dismantling this. However, this requires massive and sustained protests, strikes, and civil disobedience. And most of all, it requires the building of a revolutionary party capable of leading the working class to power. So how does the NDP fit into this situation? Well, the NDP, the New Democratic Party, is the political arm of the labour movement in English Canada. Its formation in 1961 was the result of the merger of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation and the Canadian Labour Congress. That merger represented an organizational break by an important section of the workers' movement with the parties for big business. Now, the break, however, was incomplete. The leadership of the party and the unions remains strongly pro-capitalist. In other words, the leadership acts contrary to the interests of its social base. The NDP's base of over 4 million voters, 120,000 individual party members, plus 350,000 affiliated union members is overwhelmingly working class. This is true despite the predominance of the petty bourgeois social climber types in the parliamentary caucus and on the executive bodies. The NDP leadership is caught in a class contradiction. It betrays the social base every time it advocates or legislates social cuts or anti-labor laws or national chauvinist policies. And as the crisis of capitalism deepens, the NDP is increasingly torn between the neoliberal agenda and socialism. Now, the task for socialists is to galvanize resistance to neoliberalism inside the unions and inside the NDP. Our task is to organize a class struggle opposition to the treacherous leadership of the unions and the NDP. Such an opposition should be based on what we call a workers' agenda, a platform of demands consistent with the method outlined in Trotsky's transitional program, which was discussed here last week. And it is exemplified in the Manifesto for a Socialist Canada, which we're selling over there if you're interested. The class struggle opposition in the unions and the NDP will be a vital source for the future mass revolutionary workers' party in this country. At the present time, however, our task is to address and to challenge the failure of leadership in the unions and the NDP on a whole range of issues, from the struggles against national oppression to the resistance against a corporate imperialist neoliberal agenda. So, what is the alternative? Vital to the survival of the past gains of the working class, vital to any progress on the problems that plague humanity and this planet today, is the development of an organized opposition in the unions and the NDP. The notion that the present leadership presents a realistic course that can be implemented incrementally and gradually flies in the face of all the facts that we know. The bureaucrats' steady retreat before the rulers' offensive, their underestimation of advancing economic and environmental crises, cries out for radical and immediate change of direction. Radical action requires systematic organization, and the systematic organization of radicals does not occur spontaneously. It must be conscious and it must be deliberate. I'll pull this apart for a second. So, you see, class struggle politics, internationalism, socialist policies, and transitional demands do not spontaneously appear. They have to be articulated and advanced. The openings for major radical change are usually brief. To make the most of such opportunities requires a revolutionary organization. And a revolutionary organization requires revolutionary theory and revolutionary strategy. Theory without practice is barren. And practice
Without
without
theory.
theory is blind.
It's blind.
The Revolutionary Workers' Party, even as a small seedling, unites theory and practice. The Revolutionary Party is the living memory of the working class and of all oppressed people. It is the vital link to the future mass political vanguard of the working class. And if we wait to form such a party once a revolutionary crisis begins, all history teaches us that it will be too late. The opportunity for meaningful change will be squandered. Capitalist politicians, fake leftists, and skillful bureaucrats will fill the political vacuum and divert social struggles into a dead end. They will restabilize the system of exploitation, oppression, and war. So herein lies the urgency of building a revolutionary organization now, today, not just to prepare for the final conflict, but to fight for concrete gains in a way that empowers the disenfranchised and shatters illusions of the capitalist order. So one of the questions you may be asking yourself is, why is the socialist left so divided? You see all these little groups around. Why can't we just unite and transform into a party that's capable of transforming society?
I was wondering about that.
Well, then, thank you, Barry. With all such questions, the answer is rooted in history. It is rooted in conflicting class interests, and it's rooted in the crucial political differences that have arisen out of the experience of the workers' movement over the past 150 years. The transition to workers' power cannot be achieved spontaneously or in decentralized fashion. Now, this is due to the centralized nature of the existing capitalist class rule. In addition, the uneven development of nations and the desynchronized nature of class conflict worldwide impose the need for greater solidarity and stronger political organization of the dispossessed. Now, fundamental differences over the questions of party and state led to two major splits in the workers' movement. The first was the split between Marxism and anarchism. This largely had to do with major differences over the nature of transition and the need to construct a revolutionary party. The second major split occurred over reformism. Now, revolutionary socialists have always been in the forefront of the fight for reforms. And this is clearly evident in the Communist Manifesto, among other things. Reformism, however, is the doctrine of a gradual transition to socialism by relying on the accumulation of reforms. Reformism is the theory that believes that the basic problems of society can be solved, or that even socialism can be achieved by the gradual accumulation of reforms, and it fosters illusions in the neutrality of the capitalist state as the vehicle for such reforms. It subordinates workers to the preservation of the state, the current system, and the state. And even today, many leftists have abandoned revolutionary theory and organization altogether. They have simply stumbled backwards to reformism, whether they'd like to admit it or not. The essence of revolutionary Marxist strategy is to combine the struggle for reforms with the struggle for revolution. This is the only way in which to build a revolutionary party capable of providing reliable leadership to the masses and of enabling them in revolutionary situations to make the transition in consciousness and in action from the struggle for reforms to the struggle for political power and the revolutionary transformation of society. Now, Canada today is not in a revolutionary situation, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality. Now, on the other hand, it is also true that there is considerable social unrest, frustration, alienation, and the start of a sizable radicalization in this country, especially among young people. Now, even though a revolution is not on the agenda today, the development of a revolutionary strategy is. But you can't develop one unless you take into account the way to win millions of independent working class people to political action. Revolutionary Marxists are not opposed to the struggle for reforms. What we oppose is reformism. Reformists push for reforms in a class collaborationist fashion. They attempt to convince the exploited and the oppressed masses that the system is reformable. that their interests and those interests of the exploiters and the oppressed can somehow magically be reconciled, and that class struggles should not be fought to their logical conclusion. Revolutionaries, on the other hand, fight for reforms, but we don't stop teaching the truth about the inadequacy of reforms. As long as the ruling class is not removed from power, there will always be the threat that the reforms can be cancelled or made meaningless by the simple stroke of a keyboard. Historical experience exposes the falsehood that capitalists will ever allow a peaceful transition to socialism. And there are many examples. Countries like Chile, France, Jamaica, Indonesia, Grenada, Greece, Spain, where the working class came up against the pressures of the capitalist class, often in ways that severely weakened or totally sank those reform efforts. The aspirations to produce socialism by evolutionary means and by peaceful elections is always going to be derailed by the capitalist class. And they do this through political manipulation, xenophobia, nationalism, and when all other means have failed, they do it through brutal and violent counter-revolution. And that's a point that's important, because they are the people who bring violence in society, not socialists. It's just not the case. So let's return to the original question. Why can't the various groups arrive at a principled common ground? Well, one important reason is the relatively low level of the class struggle in society. A higher level of class struggle would put many theories to the test. It would help to separate fact from fiction and separate correct ideas from wrong-headed ones. Unfortunately, socialists are compelled to work under existing conditions, not under the conditions we might choose. We cannot afford to wait until the conditions are more to our liking. That is, if we really want to influence events in a revolutionary direction and to ultimately win power. Furthermore, we know that class struggle is an ongoing process worldwide. We know that revolution is an outcome of that ongoing process in specific circumstances. Socialists strive to advance the class struggle where we live and work, and to mobilize support for workers' struggles, and especially for revolutionary breakthroughs wherever they may occur. And this is the approach of Socialist Action in the Canadian state. Socialist Action is a democratic, centralist political organization that stands on a revolutionary socialist program. Now, we are actively involved in a variety of political campaigns and in a number of social movements, including movements for human rights, for the end to poverty, for feminism, for a green transformation of society. We are actively involved with solidarity movements to support revolutionary Cuba, and with movements of anti-imperialist resistance in Palestine and Venezuela. Our primary orientation is to the working class and to its labor and political institutions. We are present in mass working class protests. We are actively involved in building a class struggle left-wing opposition in the unions and inside the labor-based NDP. We do not abstain from work in the NDP, but neither do we adapt to the treacherous policies of the NDP leaders. SA practices participation in the struggle for socialist policies and for a workers' agenda, as explained in our booklet, which unfortunately we don't have, called Prospects for Socialism in Canada.
But it exists.
It exists.
It's not
we didn't bring it to you. We didn't bring it to you.
I'm taking orders.
In other words, we're for conflictual participation. We are not cheerleaders for the NDP establishment. Now, we are the backbone. We are the backbone of the NDP Socialist Caucus. We helped force the removal of Tom Mulcair and to get the NDP to adopt a cross-country discussion of the LEAP manifesto. For years, we have been pushing for pharmacare and for dental care, for raising the minimum wage, for free tuition in post-secondary schools, for the mass construction of quality public housing, and for raising taxes on the wealthy. Now, these ideas were adopted by the NDP and were presented more or less effectively during the June 7th provincial election. The Socialist Caucus has built a base of hundreds of members inside the NDP, and we have a national media profile. With at the most recent federal election convention in Ottawa in February, we were the only group the only group that proposed changes to the convention agenda, demanding more time for policy discussion. The Socialist Caucus was in the forefront for demanding that socialist resolutions be given priority. Ours was the only literature table that attracted hundreds of people in attendance, and we're the only group that regularly produces a magazine espousing solidly socialist perspectives. I love Barry being here. He's like my
Vanna White.
Audio visual. I'm an audio visual.
Prop.
Prop. I actually locked out, but I'm not.
That's right. And let me tell you this. The Socialist Caucus was the only group, I can't stress this enough, the only group that presented a slate of socialist candidates for election to the federal executive of the party. The only group. No other groups out there presented candidates. Now, to be sure, the Socialist Caucus is not loved by the bureaucrats and the reformists who run the party. Why? Well, because we stick to our principles and refuse to be pushed around by the self-serving officials who run the NDP. However, we remain open to working with like-minded groups and individuals, whether they agree with the manifesto or not, as long as they wish to advance the workers' agenda. And we will not be diverted from this task. Yes, there are other groups out there, but none of them consistently present an alternative policy platform or a team of candidates to challenge the right-wing party establishment, much less target the toxic capitalist system. Having said that, a left united for particular aims is possible. In fact, it would be very, very powerful, irresistible in fact. Unity in action should be our common goal. But the NDP Socialist Caucus is but one small part of our work that Socialist Action undertakes. We have members across the country. In May, we hold an educational conference, which includes a convention for all members to decide on matters of policy, campaigns, and orientation, and to elect our leadership. Members pay monthly dues, they sell a monthly newspaper, they attend regular meetings, and new members pass through a provisional membership period of 3 months to determine their suitability for full membership. We place a high priority on education both internally and externally. We practice democracy in discussion and unity in action. All members, including our leaders, are duty-bound to carry out the adopted policies of our organization. Unlike Labour and NDP leaders, who often disregard convention decisions in favor of their own personal positions, we, in Socialist Action, practice what we preach, and we preach what we practice. That should be enough to shine a light of hope in this dark, tormented, cynical world. Now, as I said at the beginning tonight, Socialism in the Park is a course for those who want to gain a better understanding for changing the world. Socialist Action is an organization for those who want not just to understand the world, but to change it. SA is for people who want to replace the tyranny of capitalist minority and replace it with the immense creative potential of the democratic, cooperative commonwealth. In other words, a socialist world. And if you agree with that goal, then you should join Socialist Action today. Thank you.